All right, we're back on the Hoplite channel. Yet again, one more time, we are here to discuss some Stoicism. And if you clicked on this video, you clicked to see chivalry versus courtesy. What's the diff? Yeah, so I'm continuing on this trend with these Stoicism shorter videos, hopefully, that can keep your attention. I did the last video on hedonism versus happiness. What's the difference? And that question is definitely one of those questions I think every Stoic should ask themselves, because the object of Stoic philosophy is to attain happiness. And we know that's only done through pursuit of the virtues. So knowing the difference between hedonism and happiness, therefore, is significant, because they may seem similar in many regards, but happiness, as I said in that video, is something that is hard to attain and long-lasting, whereas hedonism is quick, fleeting, easy to attain, and doesn't really require much effort at all. So I figured, why not continue in the same vein and describe the difference between chivalry and courtesy. And I think today there is a lot of confusion as to what chivalry meant and what it means today, and what courtesy used to mean and what it means today, and how people, especially when it comes to the sexes, confuse courtesy and chivalry. And hopefully this will explain those differences and why it matters. So let's get into it, right? So let's start with chivalry, okay? And these are just I think Cambridge Dictionary definitions. So this is not my work. This is just me citing a source and what it says in the dictionary itself. So we start with chivalry being a noun, which means very polite behavior, especially kindness of men towards women, right? So in the modern sense, we understand chivalry to be a man going above and beyond just simplicity and showing more than the attention he would show to a man who was in trouble, needed help, or just was given deference. A man would not show chivalry to another man. A man would show chivalry to a woman. Okay, so we understand that chivalry is something in the modern sense that is almost akin to, I wouldn't say romantic deference, but you could say there's romance involved, right? Like, you wouldn't say a young man would show chivalry to an older woman, or an older man would show chivalry to a younger woman. It would probably be a young man showing chivalry to a young woman, because there's maybe some romantic chemistry involved, and his self-sacrifice or his deference to her interests would be in his interests, perhaps. But let's go further back into history, way back, medieval. Let's get medieval in this definition. Chivalry in the old sense was defined as also a noun, a system of behavior followed by medieval knights placing high value on honor, courage, and benevolence. Right. So chivalry in the old sense didn't really discuss anything as far as men's behavior towards women, although there's possible explanation as to why the modern definition adopted this distinction from the old definition of chivalry. But I took some notes here. And so we know that the system of behavior for knights is considered the Knight's Code. And if you've been watching this channel at all, I did a series on samurai literature. And the samurai literature series was centered around the samurai's code, which would have been Bushido. And Bushido is just translated roughly from the Japanese to English, the warrior's way, or the way of the warrior. Right, Bushi, warrior, do, the way. Like, you know, judo, taekwondo, bushido, it's just the way of the warrior. It's their code. And like Bushido, the knights of Europe had a similar code, and this was the chivalric code. So the word itself actually comes from a medieval Latin word, cavallari. And the cavallari were horsemen. And in Charlemagne's time, he was the first Holy Roman Emperor, the cavalry were the knights, right? And the French word chevalier, horsemanship, horseman, it was a code intended for the conduct of those men who had mastered riding horseback, especially in combat, in war. And those would be the knights. So if you go to the origin of the medieval knights in Europe, there were a couple incidents, I won't say a couple, there were actually several years of northern raiders coming down from Scandinavia and just, pillaging and burning and raping and murdering and doing horrific things to civilians and looting these settlements, especially in northern England and later in Ireland and in places around the UK. And in the south, you had southern invasions into places like Spain and France. The southern invasions were the Muslims from the Moors, and the northern invasions were from the Vikings, the Norse. Right, so Europe was kind of trapped in the middle. You had warring tribes coming from the north, the Vikings, who were vicious and were raiding, and just anything that moved that got the axe. Or if anything had wealth, they got the axe. Priests, nobility, peasants, didn't matter. And same thing with the Moors, the Muslim Moors invading parts of Spain and France and Portugal, places like that. It was about conquest. So at this time, Christianity had made its way into Western Europe and Central Europe, and they needed to devise a way of defending their countries from these invasions. So they had to raise an army, and they needed professional soldiers desperately. And these professional soldiers became knights. And knights were similar to samurai in that they served the Lord, they protected their fiefdom, their part of the realm. And if there were invasions, they would defend what they could defend, and they would call reinforcements from surrounding lords, surrounding fiefdoms to come in as reinforcements. And Alfred the Great was the first king of England to successfully repel the Viking invasions into England. And El Cid was a knight in Spain who was successful in helping expel the Moors from Spain. So each of these men were in different parts of Europe, but they followed the Knights Code. And there was an issue. After all of these invading parties, whether the Vikings or the Moors, had been expelled, the question was, well, what do we do with these knights? Because these were just young men that were trained to be killers, professional soldiers, and they had nothing left to do. So what do young men who've got nothing better to do, how do they occupy their time? Well, they become bullies, they become punks. So you had these knights who had no Vikings or Moors to fight, so they just became bullies to their neighbors. They would harass peasants, they would chase after women, they would get drunk, they would start fights, they would swing swords around. And eventually the church, which was the most organized, I guess you would say, leadership in these countries, told the nobility, you've got to get these knights under control. Yeah, we needed them to expel the Vikings. Yeah, we needed them to expel the Moors, and they did that. But now we've got to deal with them. Like, they are harassing the people they're meant to protect. So the church came up with the chivalric code, and the nobility agreed because they had to get these young men under control and divert their attention from, I guess, drinking and gallivanting into being a productive, benevolent force in their country and serve their lords and the church. And chivalry was the way to do that, to give them motivation, to give them guidance. So they came up with the code. And the cavalry, as the horsemen and the chevalier, that made sense, that the word chivalry comes from the horsemanship, from the military training of the knights. Right. And we know that there are three texts. I can say that word, right? So, texts. There is the Ordre des Chevaliers, which I believe is French. There is the Livre de Ordre de Cavalleria, That could be Italian or, yeah, I think that's Italian. I don't know. The Livre des Chevaliers of Geoffroy de Charny. They also could be French. Those three texts are a text. They're essentially guides for chivalry. They are written word that show knights that are just coming into the profession what is expected of them as far as virtuous conduct and how they are to conduct themselves, whether it be on the battlefield or off. And it's interesting to note that of the three texts, there is no evidence to indicate that the authors knew of the existence of the other two texts. So it seems strange, though, because we have these words chevalier and cavalry. How would you not know? I mean, they sound so similar. How would you not know these other two texts were being written elsewhere in Europe? But that's the story. And so if you want to boil these chivalric codes down to 10 commandments for the knights, this would essentially be the 10. And these 10 commandments were developed far later in history. I think around the 1890s, scholars were able to figure out that these were the 10 cornerstone commandments that the knights were supposed to follow if they were to be considered good, honest Christian men. And the first was, believe all that the church teaches and observe it. That makes sense. The church is the one that organized the knights into defending England or Spain or France from invasion. So the church is the sole authority. So believe the church teachings and obey and observe the practices. Right, so go to church. Number two, defend the church, right? So the church is in charge, defend the church because it's everything. Three, respect all weaknesses and defend them. So this goes to the benevolence cornerstone. And the same thing you can find in the samurai's Bushido code, that benevolence was a virtue that was required of knights and samurai because they were going to be given military training, they were going to be afforded military weapons that regular citizens were not permitted to own, so they had to show benevolence because they were that much stronger and they had that much more resources to administer pain or death. So they had to show benevolence, and if they saw somebody was weaker, they could not take advantage of that unless that person was a threat to them. And that was, I think, a big one because, like I said, when the Vikings had been expelled, the knights had nothing better to do. They became bullies. And so they wanted to make the knights understand that this role they had as knights was sacred for the defense of the country, but they could not abuse their abilities and harass the very people they were supposed to be there protecting. And fourth, love the nation of your birth. So be patriotic. If you're a German knight, love Germany. If you're an English knight, love England, love France. If you're a French knight, etc. That goes, for king and country. That's where that comes from. 5, do not recoil before your enemy. Again, this goes to courage. Do not recoil before your enemy. Don't run. Don't turn your back. If you're going to lose, take it like a man. 6, make war against the infidel without hesitation or mercy. Right. So this is a commandment that is meant to remind the knights that the Vikings could come back. The Moors could come back. Another invading force could come back. These are infidels. They are here to attack the church and they're here to attack your country. Attack them and do not hesitate and show no mercy because they will show you none. Sort of Christian, right? 7, perform your feudal deeds if they be not contrary to God's law. So essentially what this commandment is saying is that observe the feudal system, right? So if you're a knight, it's possible you were in the noble class, but it's also possible you were just a working class blue collar knight and you had no nobility, no noble stock. So if you have feudal deeds to observe, do so because that's required of you as well. When there's no war going on and it's peace, you still have a job to do in your feudal capacity. And 8, never lie and keep thy word, right? So this goes to the cornerstone of honor. An honorable knight was an honest knight, and an honorable knight was one who gave his word and kept it. So if you promised to do something, you had to follow through. and you did not bear false witness or tell a lie to conceal your actions or thoughts or to cover up for somebody else's misdeeds or failure to act. 9, be generous and give largesse to all good souls. Right, so this goes back to benevolence. Give largesse to all good souls and be generous. Again, knights were given this privilege of being the protector class, so they had resources and wealth beyond the regular tradesmen or peasants. So they were instructed to be generous because their fellow man probably had it far worse. And 10, be the champion of right and good against injustice and evil wherever you go. And this was the final commandment, but it encapsulated all the previous 9 commandments. Fight for good, be on the side of right, and fight injustice and evil wherever you encounter it. And this is again going to the, this incorporates probably all 3, honor, courage, and benevolence. Okay, so we know that in the conclusion of describing chivalry, it was intended as a knight's code. Is chivalry really relevant in today's age, in 2020? I would say no. We don't have lords, we don't have ladies, we don't have knights. We have pretty much what is claimed to be an egalitarian society. Even though there's no such thing, it is held out to be egalitarian. Everybody has equal rights, everybody has equal opportunity, blah, blah, blah. Chivalry is based upon a feudal system where there is inherent inequality, and the system is set up to structure society based upon that natural inequality. So chivalry was put in place by the nobility and the church to ensure that the realm had protection. More importantly, the nobility and the church had protection from invading forces, and they weren't going to be killed or robbed, but also that the lower classes didn't revolt against the upper class, because the code of chivalry provided that the knights would be generous, they would be brave, and they would be righteous. We don't live in a feudal system anymore. So I say chivalry is done. It's over. If it ever comes back, it's possible. But as far as, the modern Western world exists, chivalry is just one of these things that people tell you as a man that you have to do. But as I said before, the reason this definition probably exists is because benevolence. In the feudal system, women had it very tough. There was no, Equal Protection Act. There was none of these laws in place that said you couldn't do X to a woman if you had a mind to do it as a man. And the church and the nobility realized this, and that women were probably the most vulnerable people in the kingdom at any given time, and that they needed men to take upon this role as a protector, as a guardian on behalf of righteousness and goodness, so that women would have protection from a strange man and could rely upon men she didn't know or who she was unrelated to save her from death, pain, or sexual assault, what have you. That's probably where the modern day definition comes from, is because in the chivalric code of old, women were more often than not the main benefactors of the knight's code. Okay, let's move to courtesy. Courtesy, we see, is a noun as well, and it's polite behavior in remarks or actions, and the synonym would be manners. Showing good manners is showing good courtesy. And like chivalry, we know that there are several handbooks on noble etiquette, and they can be found from works transcribed in the 12th and 13th centuries. So right around the same time that chivalry was becoming the knight's code, courtesy was becoming the nobility's code. And the French, I believe, courtesy, I can't pronounce French, courtesy, it translates to things required of the noble class while they are in royal court. Courtesy is for the court. So if you were of the noble class and you were invited to the king's court, or the queen was putting on something, or someone else in the royal family had invited the nobility to court, there were certain things the nobility had to observe as far as their words and their actions if they were to be considered good-mannered. Saying certain things or doing certain things that were considered discourteous could get you in trouble. If you did something and it was a lapse of judgment or it was infrequent, it was most likely forgiven. But if you showed regular discourtesy, it showed that, number one, you didn't care about the hierarchy, which would be nobility and then royalty, and then number two, you were just too stupid to remember. Either way, it didn't reflect good on you. You were too stupid to know what to do, or you were just a discourteous oaf, and you were rude, and that was unbecoming of nobility. So it definitely was in your interest to show courtesy when you were in the royal court because it was expected. And by not showing it, if the royalty had the mind that you were doing this to be disrespectful, as in discourtesy showed to the royalty was so bad that it amounted to disrespect, it could get you killed. And I think some cases it did. But we can find that the noble etiquette was written down in these books. And there was a book in particular called the Liber Urbani. Urbani, we get the word, this is Latin, but we get urbane. Urbane is similar to someone that shows good manners, that is polite, that is gentlemanly, etc. And I wrote down a few that can be found in the Liber Urbani. And these are in no particular order, but I thought this would be interesting to read off. One, we have, if you wish to belch, remember to look towards the ceiling. Okay, so if you were in the royal court of King Henry the fifth or fourth, and you had to rip out a burp, you could do it, but you couldn't do it facing forward or down. You were supposed to look to the ceiling and burp up, and this was considered courteous behavior. Now, I think, based upon what we know about, viral particles or bacteria, burping into the air is probably the worst thing you could do for everybody involved. Because what goes up has to come down, right? But according to this Liber Urbani Code of Etiquette, burping into the sky, 100% good courtesy. 2, do not attack your enemy while he is squatting to defecate. Yeah, this is a rookie move. So if you have an argument with someone in the noble class, you could challenge them to a duel. But if you wanted to get the drop on them, and let's say the guy you had an argument with dropped his trowel and he was going to bend a biscuit in the woods, you were not permitted to attack him while he was in the process of bending said biscuit. It was discourteous to do that because he's at a disadvantage and you're essentially taking advantage of his position in hopes of defeating him. Discourteous. Wait for him to finish his business, and then you can have your sword fight or draw pistols or what have you. But if he's squatting to defecate, discourteous to attack him. So says the Liber Urbani. Next, if you wish to keep something out of public knowledge, do not tell your wife. Yeah. Okay. We can all agree the belching thing, that's definitely old. That's old technology. We know that doesn't work. If you wish to keep something out of public knowledge, don't tell your wife. Debatable. But, think about that one. Say thank you to your host. Of course, that still counts today. Always offer guests a drink. Yeah, this is common courtesy. If you're in the noble class and, Thurston Howe III and his wife come over, it's common courtesy off the bat to offer them a drink once they have, sat down. Next one, do not mount your horse in the hall. Yeah, that's bad form. That's like pulling your car onto the neighbor's lawn when there's plenty of driveway space. Like, why would you do that? Like, if it rains, you're going to turf the lawn. It's just bad form. Don't do it. Don't mount your horse in the hall. Mount the horse outside. Don't park your car on your neighbor's lawn or your host's lawn unless he tells you to. Receive gifts from great men with gratitude. Yep, no brainer. If somebody of noble birth gives you a gift, accept it graciously. Even if you don't want it or if you don't like him, or you don't even like the gift, it's still a gift. Show gratitude to the person giving it, and that's considered courteous. So yes, modern day examples. If you want someone to give you something, say please. When they give it to you, say thank you. If you were the person giving the item, once you hear thank you, say you're welcome. If someone is rushing to get on an elevator, hold the door. If they can't open a door because they're carrying something heavy, hold the door for them. If you're walking into a business or building and someone crosses paths with you, give them the option of going first and say after you. Accept it graciously, and if there's a second door further inside, hold the door for the person that allowed you to enter first. This is good courtesy. This is reciprocity. Now you may be asking, why does this matter as far as Stoicism is concerned? Well, as a Stoic would say, you don't control the outside world. The outside world is without your control. The inside world, which is here, up here, that is within your control. And that is all you have. You can tell a lot about somebody by being courteous to them off the bat. Chivalry, yeah, forget about that. We're way past that. That era's gone. Courtesy still exists in the modern sense because even though we don't have the nobility or the royalty, mostly in the West anymore, the manners are what carry over, and those are still applicable. And as a Stoic, you can really determine someone's character by simply being courteous off the bat. Someone who is courteous back to you is showing reciprocity. They control their own thoughts, you control yours by being nice, polite, by giving them deference when you don't have to, and if they show it in return, these are two like minds meeting in the middle. They don't want to offend anybody, and they don't want to be offended. But if you're courteous and the person dismisses you or shows discourteous behavior, well, then you can pretty much figure out their character from that behavior as well. So yes, as a Stoic, you would by default say courtesy is the way to go because it goes back to the golden rule. Treat others as you would like to be treated. Show courtesy when courtesy is showed to you, and everybody will get along. I think I might do a series on the difference between courtesy and respect. A lot of people would say that, oh, you're being disrespectful, or that's showing disrespect. There is significant difference between courtesy and respect. Courtesy is just manners. It is being polite. It is what somebody just owes anybody off the street. No one has to think twice about it. It's just not, I wouldn't say it's like a human right, but it would just be the base level decorum you would have to show a stranger is courtesy, nothing more. Respect is something different. Respect is, as a Stoic would say, something you give to someone who has demonstrated self-control and has embraced the virtues. That is worth respect. That is worth admiration. That is worth you looking up to someone as a model for your own behavior. Respect is something deeper. To show respect is beyond simple courtesy. Respect is, I have actually heard what this person has said, but more importantly, I have seen what they have done. And I owe them respect because I believe that the words they say and the deeds they have done embrace the virtues, and I have to admire that. I have to look up to that. And this person, because of that, is entitled to respect. To be disrespectful to a stranger is nonsensical. You could be discourteous, but there is no way you could disrespect a stranger because you don't know them from anybody else. So how could you formulate an opinion based upon the Stoic virtues or any virtues simply in the few minutes you've known this person? People who confuse respect for courtesy either don't know the difference or they think they're entitled to too much. You're entitled to courtesy. You are not entitled to respect. And chivalry, I don't know who's entitled to that nowadays because, as I said, we live in an egalitarian society, and people looking for chivalry probably are the same people who think you owe them respect and not just mere courtesy. And that ain't right. Okay. All right. This has been the Hoplite Channel. Chivalry versus courtesy. What's the difference? what's the diff? Yeah, maybe I'll do, like I said, I'll do a series for courtesy versus respect, the differences between those two. Because to be honest, chivalry and courtesy, yeah, you can confuse those two, I suppose, but more confusion, I believe, happens in the modern era for respect and courtesy. Right. Okay, cool. So if you're liking this What's the Diff series, give it a thumbs up. If you like this in particular, give it a thumbs up. If you are liking the channel, hit the subscribe button, share it with family or friends who you think might get some value or at least entertainment out of this series. And yeah, we will be back with a future episode, maybe along these lines, or I might go into a different topic, just depending on where the wind takes me. In any event, it's the Christmas season now, so I hope everyone's getting into that spirit, despite the fact that the previous 11 months of 2020 have been quite difficult to deal with. I hope towards the end here, as we turn the final pole in this race, we could end 2020 on a decent note. And I like the Christmas season for that reason alone, is that it gives you a good feeling just to end the year on, regardless of how good or bad the season, the previous part of the year may have been. Okay, once again, Hoplite Channel, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time. Till then, take it easy.